Dragon Quest Heroes finally comes to the States, and it has the honor of being Brainal.net's first video game review. I'm Jepicondyle, welcome to Brainal Reviews. So why don't we start with the story? The story starts off in the city of Arba in the world of Yggdrasil. What caught me by surprise was that in this world, the monsters that you fought over and over again in prior Dragon Quest games or Dragon Warrior games are not hostile at all. They're pretty friendly to the whole town and any human. That being said, if that were the end of the story, then we wouldn't really have much of a game in front of us. So, of course, some event had to happen where these monsters that were friendly turn on us and start attacking the citizens of Arba. Which leads us to the protagonist. Now, the protagonist you can either choose from Lucius or Lucius, I don't really know how to pronounce his name, I'll tell you why a little bit later, or Aurora. And they are captains of the King's Guard and serve under King Doric, who obviously is the king of Arba. After the first mission, you stop any immediate threat that the monsters had attacking the people, and you work with King Doric, who's really friendly to you. And I'll explain that too, or maybe not, because I would be spoiling stuff, and I shouldn't do that at all. But anyway, you guys work together and pretty much figure out what's causing this threat, who's behind it, how to stop it, and get things back to normal. Interestingly, one of the close friends of Lucius and Aurora is a heel slime named Helix, and he actually did not turn into a hostile monster. He actually remained his normal self. As the story progresses, you encounter other characters from other Dragon Quest games or Dragon Warrior games because they were transported from their respective dimensions into your particular world of Yggdrasil. I don't want to give away the characters, but if you're familiar with the Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior games, if you look at these videos, you can pinpoint like, okay, I recognize this one from Dragon Quest, whatever, and this one from Dragon Quest, whatever, and I'll leave that up to you guys to figure out on your own. That being said, all the individual characters themselves are pretty one-dimensional, maybe a little bit deeper, but at least in their own right, they're very distinct and offer different types of personalities to the overall story, which is refreshing. The drawback, however, is that because a lot of these characters are from different dimensions, and we don't really get to know their backstory, especially if you have not played prior Dragon Quest games, their character development was actually pretty lacking in my personal opinion. However, I felt the new characters introduced in this game, the core characters, developed pretty well towards the end of the game. In terms of pacing, the story, to be honest, started off pretty slow, pretty simple, that didn't quite really motivate me to move forward on with the missions. However, about 10 hours into the game, certain events transpired that really motivated me to continue the missions just to see what happened to the characters. Alright, so let's get on to the gameplay itself. If you're unaware of this, Dragon Quest Heroes is actually a Dynasty Warriors game set in the Dragon Quest universe. This is definitely not a first for the Dynasty Warriors franchise, since they've also done this with the Zelda series and the One Piece anime a few years back. But if you're anything like me and have never played a Dynasty Warriors game before, this is how these games usually shake out. At its core, any Dynasty Warriors game, and therefore this game itself, is some hybrid of a hack and slash game with a strategy game. Now, the way the game starts off, they introduce you more to the hack and slash elements of the game, which includes the standards of attacking with your weapon, jumping, dodging, and blocking, but also you can learn how to cast certain spells, which is pretty cool. The game does offer two main control styles. There are quick controls and slick controls. I started with the quick controls first, but I found that to be a little too simplistic for me, so then I switched over to the slick controls, which I ended up enjoying a little bit more. One thing you gotta know about these missions in this game is that they throw a ton of enemies at you at once. So it's extremely helpful to learn how to pull off these different combos and these different spells to just destroy anything in your path. Which brings me to one of the coolest aspects of the battle system in this game. Even though in the beginning of the game when you actually choose one of the two main protagonists to be, the truth is you actually play as everyone. And as you play the mission, you can swap between any of your party members on the fly just by pressing the L2 trigger. So it's pretty satisfying to play as one character, destroy some enemies, use up some magic points to cast whatever huge spells you want, and then switch to another character immediately, and then use their magic points to create other spells as the prior spells you casted with the previous character are still occurring. Learning to quickly juggle between all of your party members was really cool and very satisfying to me. On top of the normal battery of attacks that you have a separate meter that is your tension meter. Now this is essentially a super meter. As you completely annihilate different enemies, this meter will eventually build up, and once this thing builds up, you can trigger one of the Super Saiyan mechanics of the game. And I'll explain later why I'm saying Super Saiyan specifically. And when you trigger this rage mode, you become an OP god of awesomeness. Your attack power is increased, your defense value is increased, and any of the spells that you want to cast doesn't cost you a single magic point. During this time, the tension meter will drop down to 0. At any point, you can trigger one of the most amazing attacks in the game called the coup de grâce, which is French for final blow. Every particular party member has their own specific coup de grâce, and if you can time things just right, you can initiate one coup de grâce, worry about one person, while your other characters are building up their tension meters and then slowly just start chaining those final attacks. Now, I'm always going to be straightforward and honest with all of you. In my personal humble opinion, the hack and slash elements of the game don't really pan out in the long run. They kind of take a chore-like nature left to their own devices. However, thankfully, Dragon Quest Heroes at its core is really a strategy game, and this is where the game really started to shine for me. Now, the way this works is that the mobs that you encounter in each mission usually spawn from portals called Night Maws. Through these Night Maws, you have hordes of enemies just keep coming. Every Night Maw portal is guarded by a Maw Keeper, which usually manifests as one of the enemies that you can encounter at your current level. So the task there is pretty simple. You destroy the Maw Keeper, the portal goes away. If you don't destroy the Maw Keeper, then for a certain period of time, enemies will keep coming and only make things worse. And I've learned it's so important to take care of these Night Maws right away. That's because the missions will start to introduce core objectives that you must fulfill in order to progress to the next mission. For example, there might be some place or object in a level that you have to protect, or there would be a bigger enemy going from point A to point B and you have to destroy that enemy, or you have to escort a particular character from one place to another. The idea is, even though the individual enemies may be fairly easy to beat, when you have never-ending hordes of them coming, that's going to be a big problem with the main objective of the mission. So one really cool game mechanic that really helps with the multitasking of the strategic element of the missions is summoning monsters. When you destroy certain enemies, very often they will drop one of two types of tokens. Now at any point, with the tokens that you have in your inventory, you can summon these monsters to do one of two things depending on the token. A gold token would essentially summon a monster that would stay in a certain spot and fight any enemies coming its way. A silver token will summon a monster that will execute a certain attack or help defend you or do something, but will not just linger on until it dies. So what they teach you fairly in the beginning of the strategic missions is that if there's something you gotta protect, you should summon monsters to protect that thing while you go take care of the portals and destroy them and then come back. The combination of the hack and slash element with the strategic element of the game really makes for and I mean this in a good way, a frantic gameplay that really will not let you rest on your laurels, otherwise you'd fail the mission fairly quickly if you're not careful. One thing that really did bug me toward the end of the game is that to be a really good strategy game, it would have really helped out if you could actually split your own team up and then have one party member guarding one particular spot, you know, acting like the monster summons, and then same thing with the other party members. But unfortunately, as far as what I've been exposed to in the game, there's no such mechanic. After every mission, you return back to your home base. In the beginning of the game, for the first few missions, this base manifests as just a typical campsite. However, a few missions in, you unlock something called the Stone Cloud, and this will serve as your battle station for the rest of the game. Here, you could do things like save your game, which is kind of odd because it's essentially you're confessing your sins to a nun. There's a weapons and armor dealer that you can talk to. There's an alchemist that can essentially help you craft new accessories from ingredients that you find in battle. And you can also pick up certain quests, which is a bounty system essentially. You can also unlock mini medals that are used to buy more expensive ingredients when you pull off certain achievements or trophies. In addition to all of these vendors, you also have the tavern. Now the tavern is where you would go to talk or converse with any of the various characters that you've met throughout the whole quest, but also here in the tavern is where you would tweak your party. It was a little annoying after a while though. If I wanted to make a party change, I couldn't just press start and then quickly do that. I'd have to go all the way to the tavern, talk to the bartender, and then make any changes that I wanted to. On top of the main story missions that you're going to encounter throughout the campaign, you also find little maps that can unlock side missions and challenges and stuff that you can try and tackle to unlock even further loot or accolades or whatever. There is also something very beneficial to try out, something called the Trial Isle or Isle of Trials, something like that. But basically, you're put in different challenges, but you can unlock extremely important, useful abilities, such as transporting from one place in a map to another fairly quickly. Oh, and one more very important thing I completely forgot to mention. So we have the hack and slash element of the game, we also have the strategy element of the game, but there is an RPG element of the game itself that, from what I understand, actually did really ring true back to Dragon Quest VIII, which is the only Dragon Quest game I've ever played, but I really enjoyed back on the PS2. As you progress, you actually can level up and then unlock attribute points. Now from here, you can open sub-menus and then spend those attribute points to level up different particular abilities and spells and stats or whatever. Now, even though this is an RPG element too, I really do think that the Dynasty Warriors games themselves had this as well. But I'm not entirely sure on that, so don't quote me on that. Okay, and let's finally get to the presentation. Now, one of the most impressive things about probably the most impressive thing about the game that kept surprising me the whole time I played it was the fact that the frame rate was so solid no matter what kind of action was happening on the screen. And I am saying that there was a lot of action. I couldn't even count how many numbers were in front of me when I was just kicking so much butt, and the game was just showing all the damage that I was doing. But even with all of the action going on, I haven't noticed any considerable drop in frame rate. Every once in a while you might get a slight drop, but it still ran buttery smooth the whole time I played the game. And for me, that took around 23 hours to get through the main campaign. It is very worth noting, however, that I did play this on the PS4. I can't speak to the PS3's capabilities with maintaining that frame rate. Now, as you can tell from the visuals, the art style should look fairly familiar if you've known anything about anime or prior RPGs. This is the work of Akira Toriyama. He is the creator of the Dragon Ball series, but he's also worked on previous Dragon Quest games. Again, like I said, I played Dragon Quest VIII, and he did the artwork for that too. And he also did classics such as Chrono Trigger and other RPGs such as Blue Dragon on the Xbox 360. Now, because of his distinct art style, there really isn't much variation when it comes to certain character designs and faces and stuff. He's a legend in his own right, and that is completely up to him. And you know what? I am okay with that. Now, graphically, this game doesn't really break any ground, but that should make sense because of the incredibly nice frame rate that is consistent throughout the whole game. Now, as far as audio, you're going to have a mixed bag here. This is what I was telling you before about how I didn't really know how to pronounce Lucius's name. And that's because when I first started playing the game, by default, the English language, it was English dubbed. But I really did not like some of the voice acting with certain characters, especially Helix. I cannot stand his voice, and it was just very annoying.
Let me go first.
The other characters grew on me. Some of the side characters from the other games were already established voices that I'm familiar with, like Jessica and Yangus from Dragon Quest VIII, so I liked their English voice acting. But fairly early in the game, I switched it over to Japanese voice acting, which I really appreciate a lot more. So the footage throughout this review, you're going to hear some English voices, some Japanese voices, and at least you have the choice to pick whichever one you want, so that's good at least. The writing itself really left a lot to be desired, for me at least. They decided to go with old school Shakespearean style dialogue, and it was just a little too much for me.
Now, gird your loins, friends.
And please, just way too many puns. Too many damn slime puns. But enough about the dialogue. The music is fantastic. I cannot stress this enough. I remember when I first played Dragon Quest VIII, there was some spectacular music, and that music just made a triumphant return in this game. I mean, just listen to some of this stuff. Now, one thing that really has me concerned about this game's future is the idea that because we're mixing Dynasty Warriors with Dragon Quest, in Japan I can see why that would be a no-brainer. But both of those in the West, at least, are pretty niche subgenres. And if you mix those two, you're going to only even get more specific, which could possibly alienate even more players, at least in the West. So I definitely don't think this game is for everybody. If you're a fan of at least one of them, definitely give it a shot. If you're a fan of both, definitely give this an honest shot, because you're pretty much guaranteed to love this game as it is. If you're not familiar with either of those franchises, then I hope I've done my best to show you what this game is really about, so you can make your decision whether you should try it or not. With its engaging blend of action and strategy, I thoroughly enjoyed Dragon Quest Heroes. I just hope it does well enough over here to warrant the sequel coming out to the States.